I'd like to call to order the Mount Pleasant Public School Board of Education regular meeting on September 7th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. in the Performing Arts Center. This meeting of the Mount Pleasant Public Schools Board of Education is a meeting conducted in public, but is not a meeting of the public. There is time for public participation during the meeting as indicated in the agenda. The purpose of today's meeting is to conduct regular business that requires action by the board. These items may include those discussed at a previous meeting or presented to the board for discussion this evening. As a courtesy, please turn off and silence your cell phones and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement Statement. Mount Pleasant Public Schools is honored to acknowledge the Anishinaabe people whose traditional land we are gathered on today. To recognize the Anishinaabe people and their ancestral land is our expression of gratitude and appreciation and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on this land since time immemorial, and whose land on which the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe have resided and who have continued to reside on for centuries. We feel it is important to understand the long-standing history of the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Courtney Stegman is unavailable this evening, so Tim, if you can take roll call.
Dana Calkins.
Here.
Tim Odekirk, here. Amy Bond.
Here.
Aileen Pangle.
Here.
Sheila Murphy.
Here.
Courtney Stegman. And Jessica Jernigan.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes that they would like made to the agenda this evening? Okay, not seeing any. We're moving on to reports and updates.
Good evening, everyone. In your board packet this evening, you do have information, first and foremost, regarding the MASB Annual Leadership Conference. That is a leadership conference that is in November, and we need to determine which board members are going to attend programs and courses through the leadership conference, and then also we do need to assign a delegate. And Amy, I think you have more information on that.
Yes. So anybody that would like to go to the conference, please let Deb know this week, and then at the next meeting, based off of who is going, we will be nominating delegates for the Thursday night event.
And is that event in person?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe that it is split, that people can attend virtually this year, or they also are offering a face-to-face option. So when speaking with Deb, please let her know that option as well, which one that you're considering doing, and if you're able to make it. Next is the Southwest Food Service Excellence.
Yeah, in your board packet this evening, since this is a donation from an organization that we contract with, we do not have to approve it like we typically do our donations, but we wanted it to be noted that Southwest Food Service Excellence, our food service company, did donate 41 gallons of milk to the Isabella County Soup Kitchen back in the middle of August, and that has a donated value of $326.52. So we just wanted to acknowledge that and thank SFE for being good partners in our community. And then the last item under reports and update is a PSC update from Linda.
PSC met early in August for our kickoff for the year. Our next full meeting is next week, September 16th. We are following the regular curriculum review grid that we've shared several times. And this year is the number one study for language arts, and we're going to continue to make progress and finalize our work with social studies. And we even had some head preliminary work on some science work this summer with some of our high school secondary teams. And our kickoff professional development this year was titled Healing Trauma and Restoring Resilience, and the elementary and secondary staff all attended an excellent professional development opportunity at the Soaring Eagle Ballroom in early August. We're off to a good start.
I have a question. I know we've been talking about CRT and some of the books and that type of thing. Is PSC planning on having any kind of meeting with parents and administration regarding some of the books or some of the things that are being taught?
PSC is going to organize how to approach the diversity and inclusive curriculum. That's our main task on September 16th.
Okay, are you going to include any members of the community in that?
Yes, yep, that's definitely a part of the process.
And when was that planned for?
Our next regular meeting is September 16th.
Okay.
So on September 16th, the Professional Study Committee is still organizing themselves to lay out a plan for what work is going to happen. But there's absolutely a plan to include a variety of different perspectives from our community. But we need to get their work organized first so that we can plan those dates and move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the PSC group? Okay, that moves us into the consent agenda. First off is the approval of the August 16th, 2021 regular meeting minutes.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and that passes. Next after that is new business, is the hockey co-op agreement.
Yep. In your board packet this evening, you have a memo from me and information from the Michigan High School Athletic Association, also signed forms from Beale City Public Schools, Clare Public Schools, Ithaca Public Schools, Sacred Heart Academy, and Shepherd Public Schools. All of those entities have agreed to co-op with us for our hockey program. If you remember, Mr. Conway was here back in July to talk about the plans and the program. He is here again this evening to answer your questions. But basically, your approval is the final step then for us to submit this to MHSAA so we can co-op our hockey program. And it would be for this year and for next year, and then reevaluate after that. So I can answer questions, or we can put Mr. Conway to do that if you have any questions.
Just one question. So the current agreement that we have with hockey, since it's not a fully funded program by the district, that agreement still stays in force? This is kind of an auxiliary agreement to broaden out the pool of...
That is correct. To increase the number of athletes that we have participating in the program, but nothing about the financial agreement changes with that. Any other questions? No?
So I move that we accept the recommendation of the attached Michigan High School Athletic Association cooperative agreement with Beale, Clare, Ithaca, Sacred Heart, and Shepherd Public Schools.
I'd second it.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and that universally passes. Wonderful. All right, next is new hires.
Yes, we are excited to welcome Kim Pluff. Kim is joining us with several years of experience. In fact, she is our very first critical shortage teacher in some sorts. She's got lots of experience coming from the Detroit area, has relocated to the Mount Pleasant area, and she is going to teach our elementary computers and our Title I at-risk students as an interventionist at Vowels.
Is there a motion to pass Kimberly Pluff?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and that unanimously passes. Welcome to the district. Next is donations.
So we have 3 different donations that we're asking you to approve of this evening. First is from Merchandise Outlet. Merchandise Outlet donated 5,208 children and adult face masks with a value of $26,664. Next, MJ Murphy Beauty College created a drive to donate supplies for daily living for things like shampoo, deodorant, those kinds of things, to the EI program at Mount Pleasant Middle School, and that donation was valued of $337. And then finally, we have a donation from the Staples organizations, the community partners of Staples, where they donated 278 classroom supply packs, including hand sanitizer. If you've purchased anything at Staples lately, you'll notice at their cash registers, they ask for donations and show you the little packs. So they donated 278 of those packages to us with a value of $1,890. And I believe this is the third or fourth large donation we've received from Staples, so they're quite generous. We're asking that you approve all three of those items this evening.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That unanimously passes. Thank you very much.
Next, in your board packet this evening, you do have a summary recommendation from the Student Reinstatement Committee. Our committee that is comprised of myself, Dana, and Sheila, and administrators from Mount Pleasant High School and the WAY program, met with a student S2 2018-2019 last week to review her experiences since she had been expelled from our district, and we're recommending that the board approve her readmission into the WAY program effective tomorrow.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and that passes. Welcome back to the district. And then next is the masking policy discussion. So with that, we've, at previous meetings, we've talked a lot about the need for a general policy to look at what it means to mask within the schools, if that is something that we want, and if so, what that would look like. So at this time, I'd like to open that discussion back up, that if we are to put something like that within our schools, what would that look like, and how we feel that we could go about doing something like that. I know we've had a few suggestions that have come forward, so if we want to start off with some of those as part of the discussion, if anybody would like to start that discussion, they can do so.
I'm happy to start it. I like that we are discussing different parameters under which masking would be required. My trouble with some of the plans that have been discussed, such as waiting until transmission gets to a certain point within our county before we mask, is that that is a decision that is not backed up by our health experts. And what I feel most comfortable at this point is following what our local health departments has required. And we can reconsider and follow kind of their recommendations like we followed last year. And I would feel much more comfortable than finding a threshold that is, to me, feels more, I'm missing my words here, but like something more arbitrary, I guess, of a threshold than something that's backed up by the local experts. And as I am not a health professional, that would be, for me, what feels most comfortable.
What is everybody else thinking along?
I'm looking at Jennifer's update on active cases, and to see that Mount Pleasant Middle School has 14 student cases and 2 staff cases is very alarming. We knew that there would be a bit of an upsurge, but that's, in my mind, that's a critical leap. Very concerning to me, and I'm sure to everyone.
Okay, so I'm wondering if, because as we've talked about before, coming up with a policy that would take some of those parameters that we've talked about, and knowing that numbers are rising, and that at the middle school specifically that they are, what that would look like. So depending on what we do, what would be appropriate timing? How would reevaluation look? What are some of the situations, what we need to make the decision of? What kind of policy could we put in place that, if this box is checked or this happens, then we're doing this. And then, some of the things that we've looked at before at the past few meetings have been you know, if we hit red within our community, which we have over the last 2 weeks, then we potentially go to a universal masking. And if we do that, then we reevaluate in 2 weeks and then look to get to a point where we are removing masks. So I guess for that discussion, what would you guys as a board want to look at? So we are putting parameters on that. You know, we have asked our health experts, and maybe that's part of it. We've all had the opportunity to read the answers to some questions that have been asked. If based off of those questions, anybody has any information or anything that they would like to share, but I think it would be important that we come up with some type of policy in addition to anything else that might happen. That way, we're not blindly walking into that type of situation. And that it also makes it, you know, I think we all would love to say that COVID is going to be over tomorrow and that we're not going to have to give this a second thought. We know that that's not the case. So thinking about long term, what we could do in order to do that.
I'd like to offer a couple of things, I think, to help us through this path a little bit. Since we know that all of our populations in our buildings are not equal, right? There's many different, we have employees who are adults, we have students, and within our student population, we have those who can receive a vaccine and those who cannot receive a vaccine. We have guests, right? And so we even have superseding law, for example, with buses, right? So buses is a federal law at that point. And so we have all of these different groups within our community that I think it would make it easier for us to understand and to move forward by recognizing that and thinking about how we can deal with each one of those potentially individually, maybe doing their own separate metrics. We know there's also pedagogy issues, right? So teaching reading and literacy for the young children, you don't have the same types of requirements for pedagogy styles and stuff as you would with a high school student. And so I think if we kind of break it into smaller groups, I think it would make it easier. We also have the ability for our staff, for example, to have vaccination or choose not to vaccinate, right? So even within these groups, we have different subgroups of opportunities that they choose to move forward with. And I think the policy that we create has to be structured to support them and where they are. Like many of our policies, doing one blanket one does not work. I think we're going to have to make it more finite in how we do that. But I do think that some of these triggers or some of these points that we look at to make the analysis are key. So, so the public knows we get a lot of information from the health department on a weekly basis. The questions that were asked of the health department was quite extensive in how they responded. Some board members have been sharing information across the board of different ways and things of thinking about it to make sure that we are seeing a big picture and when we're trying to make these decisions. Staff have reached out. The employees have reached out and shared their thoughts on their personal experiences within the classroom and how they view their pedagogy and how the policies is affecting it. So currently our policy is if you're younger than 12, you are masked, students. If you are older than 12, you are masked if you are not vaccinated, but if you're vaccinated, you do not have to be masked. So with that current policy...
Tim, just for the record, there's no mask requirement if you're 12 or older. You're encouraged to wear masks if you're not vaccinated, but there's no mask requirement currently for 12 or older. Just
Thank you. Yep,
want to
no, that's
clarify
perfect.
that.
Thank you for correcting me. That is correct. So, you know, and one of the things that relied on individuals' determinations of themselves on how do they police themselves, right? So the district didn't step in, much like Jen was saying, and we don't have any mechanisms for policing per se. I did think it was interesting how the state has actually opened up some avenues for some kind of oversight for that type of information using the MICR systems as availability. And so the question also becomes, you know, how do we rely on the integrity of the students to say whether they're vaccinated or not? In general, the perception has been up to this point, as many of them have not been following through on that. And so the recommendation of masking if you're not vaccinated from the middle school up does not seem to be much engaged by the student population that are there. However, I would say with the employees, they seem to be acknowledging that and being very appropriate in making those determinations and moving forward on that. And so whatever the policies that we have to look at mechanisms to manage to that policy. And then that also means what kind of repercussions do we have? The health department has said, our health department, just to clarify, because other health departments across the state have made determinations and they've stepped into this space and made the determination for the districts. I think we're at 7 or 8 health department districts that have stepped in. Our health department has specifically stated that they're not going to go into that space, that they feel this is a better decision for the school district to make these determinations. And one of the reasons is if they step in, it raises it to a criminal action instead of a behavioral action. And that the school district has better mechanisms for more behavioral mechanisms than a criminal act, right? Police and court systems of which they step in if they so choose to initiate some kind of mask determination. So I think as we look through this, the other thing that's interesting is what kind of data do we get from the health department. I've been very pleased with how the health department has been trying to align their weekly reports to things that we've been talking about and trying to provide and find data to help support us along this path. And also about what are some of the medical consequences. I've learned some very interesting things. So, for example, we do not have a pediatric ICU anywhere in our region. That if a child goes into an ICU facility, they have to be taken to Flint, to Grand Rapids, or to Ann Arbor. And I did not know that we did not have any capacity for that. But then again, that's kind of down the road. So the district really has no control about how many beds are free in the hospitals. And so utilizing some of that as our determination for whether we should be masking or escalating a masking, I think is kind of out of our control, and it's more of a repercussion of whatever our decision is than it is something that you should measure from. However, we do have things that we look at all the time. Much like was mentioned earlier, we know how many students and how many staff in our buildings are COVID positive. We have that partnership with the health department who keeps us in tune, so we actually know in each building how many students are identified and how many staff are identified, and we actually have been for well over a year managing to that number. We also know the transmission rate. It tends to be more broad, but in general, with this conversation about cocooning, especially students who are not vaccinated, that they're finding that it's the adults around them, if they are protected, that the chance that the child is protected is highly elevated. And so that idea of the adults in our community, whether they're vaccinated or not. And so some of that is reflected in the transmission rate. So I think those are two really good indicators that we look at because we know our students, one, if they're in our buildings and if they're sick for any of our diseases that we monitor, we know if they're not there and we tend to know why they're not there. Specifically with COVID, there's much more protocols in place. So we actually have hard numbers. We know how many students are in our buildings, and we know how many students are and staff who are COVID positive. Now, some of that is reported in various ways. Again, a lot of it is self-reported, or if they are in some situation where it actually goes up to a hospital or a doctor, it gets into the health department's mechanism. So, to say that these are definitive numbers are probably incorrect. More than likely, the numbers are all higher in all of our buildings, especially knowing how the rate across our greater community is. I think it would be not the best way to balance a policy on information that we know that is probably not fully accurate. However, if we choose to be accurate, we do have rapid testing and we do have the ability to test the students. So you could actually get a closer number of what the true infection rate would be, let's say, in the building. But on the other hand, that's a very large administrative leap. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of cost. But the other thing I was thinking along the line is, so we have all of these mitigating acts that we do in the buildings. So we have a whole plate of things that we are doing at this point. And so looking at the different mitigations, maybe having a way to measure what are the most appropriate or the best. So for example, if masking is determined to be less of a mitigating, impactful event, maybe testing is. Maybe bi-weekly testing would be a better mechanism to know the safety of our children in our building than masking is. But again, you have to balance things, right? The cost, the impact of the students, the information, the management of the information. But on the other hand, is masking a way to kind of be a broader statement on how you want to do that? But again, if we do something specifically masking, how do we want to divide that up? Do we want to do it by classroom? Do we want to do it by grade? Do we want to do it by building? Do we want to do it by grade in a building? Those are all the communities, right? That's where the students are all the time. They are in their classroom, so that is a community that is greatest exposure because they're face to face majority of the day. The next level probably is within the grade level. The sixth graders are all pretty much with each other at the middle school. Eighth graders are pretty much with themselves in the middle school. As you go up to high school, freshmen are more with freshmen, but as you get older, there's more blending of classes, so you don't have as much designation at this point of the differences. So is it dividing it by grade? Is it dividing it by building and grade? So Ganyard and vowels, which are the young students, right? So if you did second grade, is vowels building having the same impacts as the Ganyard building is? But all of that to say, it starts to get kind of complex. And so how can we do a policy that can give some good indications, that can give some good heads up, right? So if things are escalating, much like we're hearing in the middle school, things are escalating, actually that's a big jump. That's quite a significant leap in cases in the middle school, to be able to give families some heads up. Whatever our mitigations are, we need to have some kind of way to communicate those mitigations and this information that we do. So as we build this policy, I'd like to everyone to kind of recap, think about, masking, thinking about our different communities that we have, thinking about all the mitigation mechanisms that we do, and then tying them to a standardized determination as we go through and have to do these choices, or I should say the administration will have to do these choices, and then looking at how we want to, and what data do we want to use, and how do we want to enforce the policies and the processes as we implement it.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing those thoughts with us. I like the thought of having these different, components to think about. What worries me is that we're in the red right now, and we are in the start of a pretty serious increase. And I think that these things would be great when we're on the decrease. When how do we unmask? And I think maybe then at that point, doing it by grade or seeing based on the numbers. My worry is that I'm not sure we have the time and luxury to figure these things out as we entering the peak. I mean, the documents from our local health departments are very clear. I mean, they're basically kind of begging for us to mask the students and to have not just the students, but a universal mask mandate. And I feel very uncomfortable going against our local health experts. When we coming, and they're indicating based on mathematical models that the peak's gonna happen in early October, and that is going to decrease. And when the decrease happens, that we go into deciding, and by then we'll have had, a month more of information, how we go about unmasking. I think that makes sense, to think that not everybody is the same. As we're entering deep red, I am uncomfortable making those distinctions until that peak of, our wave is over. And so I would be I would like us to pass a universal mask mandate tonight if we can. That would be, I'm ready to make a motion whenever we are, but I also don't want to cut the conversation or make people feel like they can't talk about it.
So the public knows, so we are in high right now in our community. So it's low, moderate, substantial, and high. And we've actually been in high for almost a week, 2 weeks now.
Yep.
And so we've actually entered into our community is at high transmission levels, which is the highest level that you can have at this point. For our greater community that we're in.
Yep.
As in the county, we'll say. We'll keep our conversation to the county, because that's where I think we need to have a conversation, is about our local community and what it's doing. Granted, know that there are 2 other school districts, 3, 4, within our county, but again, our population blends, and we're the main draw, and so our community definitely has that common impact.
So then, Wheeling, I understand what you're saying about it probably needing to be a bigger discussion, but I also worry that if we just say tonight, without any type of parameters on it, okay, it's a universal mask mandate, then we might say, like, but when would it end? What would it happen? So I'm wondering if maybe we can say, at least knowing that it might be a longer conversation at some point, if we could say, well, we are in the red, therefore we are going to ask for universal masking with a review every 2
Yeah.
weeks as we don't see any further transmissions,
Absolutely.
as we hit our peak. So maybe if we could talk along those lines collectively as a board of what that would potentially look like then for the immediate need that we have
Yes.
now, and how that could be carried out to get us through those peak times. But then, like, what would we need to determine that that peak is over? So what would that look like within our community? So speaking specifically to our community, would that mean going from red back down to orange, and then we give it 2 weeks from there to make sure we're not going to immediately jump right
Right.
back up to red? Would that mean, so if we are going to say, as of right now, you know, we would do it for everyone, and then we would be able to evaluate it on I think one of the things we are recognizing is that the high school might be harder to differentiate between the grades because they are intermingling substantially more. But if we have 14 new cases at the middle school and only 2 at the high school, in the future, does that mean we automatically do the same for all, or do we look at each school as that individual basis? If we are still continuing with the idea of 12 and under, and thinking along those lines because they are unable to be vaccinated, then maybe that also becomes part of the general discussion of that timeline. So if our community is dropping down, so let's say it goes from orange to yellow, does that still lead into that we need our younger children? You know, if we're seeing ourselves coming out of the peak and continuing to trend downwards within our community, like specifically, could we then say, all right, based on these numbers and what we're seeing, masks are going to go to a, you know, optional and not a requirement. But knowing that if we are going back up to orange, then yes, everybody 12 and under are going back to masks. If we then hit red, everyone is going to mask, and we evaluate within the 2 weeks.
And I'm not opposed to that at all, and I think we could move in that direction. The only thing I don't like in that scenario is that we're taking the health department out. And I would rather we put the health department right in the center, our local health department, because I feel like they should be the one telling us when to make the calls. And as we have, you know, you have meetings with them often, to me, that's a question for them. When do you think we're okay to start unmasking? And then follow their recommendation. And again, as we've done, I mean, that was kind of our main line of conduct the entire last year. Even when some of us were uncomfortable with some of those bits that were put in place, when, let's say, we reduced the cohorting at the high school, that was done on the recommendation of the health department. I said, you know what, with the level of transmission we have now and the data we have now, it's probably fine, and it was fine. And so I think following what they're saying, for me, is our, you know, what I would argue should be our general line of conduct. And we can say we're entering the peak universal masking. We will reconsider every time. We could do it every single meeting. Say, what has the health department told us? Has that changed? What is the transmission in the county? And where are we at in those numbers? And then we evaluate as we go. And it's a very fluid situation. We all know that. Their estimate of a peak in October could be off. And you know, maybe ideally we avoid it. Like, I'm all in favor of thinking best plan scenario. And if that's the case, I'm sure the health department is going to tell us, you know what, it's going down, and we can all breathe a little bit easier and reconsider that mask mandate at that point.
I very much like looking at a policy that says if, then, so we know that if we're in red, then we have protocol. If it drops down into the orange, we have another protocol. That's pretty definitive. I think then we don't have conversations that are quite as emotional. When I look at the numbers too, even though the highest numbers are at the middle school, we have to keep in mind that they have siblings. So to see, I wouldn't be surprised, I hope I'm wrong, that there would be a spike at the other schools here shortly. And I don't think we have, I don't think we can at this point wait for 2 weeks to make another determination. I just think it's incumbent upon us to make a tough choice, whatever that may be. We don't have the luxury of waiting at this point.
I just want to make 2 points of clarification. First of all, with regards to the numbers that you all are seeing this evening, you need to keep in mind that that is a 2-week total. That's not just a spike. I mean, those numbers are big, yes, but it's increased over time. I think you also need to remember that we have almost 800 students at Mount Pleasant Middle School this year, and so those numbers really represent about 2% of our student population. So 2% is 2% too many, and I don't like to see those big numbers, and I certainly don't like to have to do all the work that we have to do when we have those numbers, but I do think we need to keep that in perspective, that it's not just something that happened today. It's been building over time, because when we consider an active case, that really is going back the last 10 days, right? Then they're no longer active after those 10 days. The other point, I think, Wheeling, when we're talking about the data, I want to make sure those levels of high transmission, substantial, moderate, and low are what the CDC uses, which is what our local health department uses. So that's not looking specifically at cases in Mount Pleasant Public Schools. That is community data. Okay, just want to make sure we're all clear
No, that
on
makes sense.
Okay.
And along that line, that's been one of the conversations of our other local districts, where they are using their actual student numbers. So they are doing a percentage of their student population who are COVID positive as their mechanism of determining as one of the main trigger points. Instead of using the broader transmission level, which is the county adult, well, it's 12, it's the whole group, and actually the public knows we actually get a breakdown, and it actually shows different age groups within that and what the rates are in our space on that overall reaching pool. So you can see if it's 85-year-olds or you can see if it's 30-year-olds. But one thing that I think is very interesting about that is many of our parents are in that 30 range that you have, and that is one of the bigger spikes, right? So many of the potential parents of all the students in our buildings are one of the bigger spikes that is going on, higher rates that are going on right now. So that cocooning idea of the adults around them is growing, and so that's going to filter and affect the students in some way.
I also think, I mean, to continue that conversation is that, as you mentioned, Tim, mask is one approach, and I do think it is the least invasive. It's not fun, I get it, but it's less invasive, I would argue, and cheaper than testing. And so while some districts have chosen the testing route, we were successful all of last year with masking. And so that would be my preference, because I do think it's worked. We know that for us. It's worked very well. And ideally, it won't be all of the year. It'll be ideally, right, mostly centered on our first trimester. And so I also think that's an important aspect of this.
And actually, Jen, so with the testing that we did last round, that we offered that, we didn't find huge pockets all over the place all the time.
No. The sort of sporadic cases here and there.
A case here and there more than anything else.
And regarding masking last year, that it worked, how do you know when you didn't have a population that you didn't mask? So how do you know it was the mask that, when I look at all the studies, masking works if you wear an N95 that's fitted, and then it's still not 100%. I looked across Israel, Europe, every place that's had Delta coming through, especially the UK, which got hit hard. They are not masking any of their students. And most of Europe, definitely 12 and under, they're not masking. What are we, are they just ignoring the science, or
So
are we just playing?
I'll start by disagreeing. I don't know about all of Europe, but in France, they have a mask mandate inside any indoor building for any person, and a mask mandate for outdoors of all of their French citizens. And so I don't know for the rest, but they're definitely masking, and they're masking heavy. I would just stay local, and I would stay in our US. I mean, we have the story in the South. Like, I would like us to avoid in Mount Pleasant what we are seeing in the South. And it is very clear that the schools that did not mask had massive outbreaks. And I really would like us to avoid this. I would really hope that we're going to not wait for an outbreak within our schools before we put a universal masking.
I'd like to kind of acknowledge some of what Sheila is saying, though. So I think that is another reason why we have many mitigations that we do and not just choosing one. I think that's really important for us to keep in mind. Cohorting is one that we aren't doing really at this point. I mean, middle school is kind of cohorted by grade to some extent, but there's still some blending going on there. But so there was a whole pool of mitigations that we did last time, and that whole pool of mitigations seemed to have worked well for us, which was masking, which was cohorting, which was the high school had the 2 on and off days, and so all of those mechanisms were in place. We also did the 6 foot, then went down to 5 to 4, and all of those mitigations were in place during that. I think it's hard to definitively say one of them was the winner, and that's why I think a plate of mitigations are always good to have in this policy as we move forward. And many of them are not directly impacting the student, let's say, like a lot of the sterilization processes, or teaching them how to wash their hands. I mean, we know that a child's not going to wash their hand perfectly every time and kill every germ on their hand every time they wash their hands. But that as one of many things, this keeps lowering all those potentials down. And so I think that's another way to look at it is, does masking potentially lower it down a point or 2 points or 10 points that can keep this balance that we have moving forward?
And Tim, I agree, and I think you're right. Like, when I say it worked, it's true. It worked along with a number of other things. But I think the health department, when they answered our questions, were very clear on everything else kept the same, the impact of masking. I mean, their numbers were about as clear as it can get, and I can cite them again because, as the audience, you haven't seen them. But they stated a school of elementary students, 25 students in a well-aerated room without any special activity. So no singing, just plain old elementary school with the Delta variant transmission, unmasked in 2 hours. There was a 50% chance of transmission. Improper mask usage, so what we might expect in a first or second grade, some are using it well, some not, some are wet, whatnot. But you go up to 20 hours, right, same conditions, to get 50% of transmission. And when you have everybody fully masked and masked well, you go up to 120 hours before you get 50% of transmission rate. To me, these numbers are about as clear as we can get. And so I would really argue that, especially since we can't cohort as well as we did last year, the cohorting was made possible by about a third of our children being, our students being in the online Oilers program. And that's no longer the case, so we can't do the cohort. It was made very clear to us, and I understand. So to me, the least we can do is at least mask everyone. Until the peak goes down, right? And then the peak goes down, we can reevaluate, we can decide again, and maybe do it more by group, based on the data that we obtain and what we have. At that point, I think that makes sense to maybe not view it as a blanket statement for everyone.
Then what I'm wondering, because again, we need to have, as a motion, it has to be pretty finite.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, I'm looking at some of the information that we were given that what like Shepherd Public Schools are doing and some of those types of things. I think the general concern right now is that we are red. We are in the highest transmission rate. We have seen those numbers that have increased. Yes, it has been the 2 weeks. But those are numbers that, I think we all hoped that we wouldn't see within our schools. So what I'm wondering is if we can look at putting some parameters on that motion, in saying that as long as we are red within our community, we would go to a universal mask mandate of students and staff. And if that if that needs to be changed as well. We can certainly have that discussion too. But that we would go to that until we go back down to orange. And then at orange, we would have information from our health department. So kind of going along those lines, saying when they feel that it would be safe, but I also would like to then maybe take into consideration what some of the other districts, so specifically with Shepherd, the thing that I was interested in is that instead of looking just as the community, they were looking within their defined schools. And so they have the fact that they're doing 1% of their buildings than everybody is mandating. So I believe that would be 7 students at the middle school, would be a 1%. And that would be individualized for each building. But then if we are going to maybe lessen the effect or lessen the masking, we look at it specifically building by building. So then if we are orange and we only have 2 students at the high school, we know that is far under. What Shepherd is also doing is they're saying, so you have that 1% everybody masked, and then they don't remove the mask until it's 5 or 0.5% or below. So it doesn't give it necessarily the option to immediately jump back up, and that it was just kind of fluke that the numbers were down and the numbers go right back up. So I'm wondering if maybe we can kind of talk in those parameters of saying that it is as if the county is red and we are in the highest transmission, we will look at masking all of our buildings. And then as we drop down into orange, we look at maybe separating out the buildings a little bit more, having that discussion with the health department and looking at their recommendation at that time, and being able to do that. I think the thing that I would also like to kind of devise is that it doesn't have to be a discussion at every board meeting because it is those boxes checked. So we are able to say, here is this, and so we're red, we're masked. We're orange, but we're over 1% at the middle school, they're masked. You know, and because we're in orange, everyone 12 and under are still masked. And then we look at, okay, but the high school is not, we're in orange, knowing that they might have to. The other thing that is interesting is this school district on Fridays is sending out a universal reminder to let the students know what next week is going to look like. So I think if we were to be reevaluating every 2 weeks and letting the families know within the district, it's not are we not, what are we going to do? We're giving families, you know, through the weekend to know that, yep, we saw a definite increase within the schools. Everybody's notified on Friday. Next week, it's mask. Or, you know, hey, we jumped back into red. It's masks. You know, I'm just wondering if we could kind of work within those parameters as we're thinking about what we could do tonight to allow for some of those things. And also, you know, again, I think we are all hopeful that the numbers are going to come down and come down quickly, but it puts some of those measures in place so it's not like we're just saying, okay, we're going to mask and we're going to mask to the end of time. That we recognize that not everybody wants to. I think it is a very split community, but it's also showing that we do care about the students on both sides. We recognize that the families who want masks, we're trying to do that. For the families that don't want masks, we're trying to do that as soon as numbers go back down and look at safely, especially when we're taking into regards of what the CDC, what some of the other, what seems that would work within our community.
You clearly put a lot of thought into this, and I do appreciate it. I'm tracking with everything you said, and between now and 2 weeks, it'll give us an opportunity to really look at, because you brought up a ton of great ideas. What are those things that we're going to reach to when we go down? And we're going to. We have to.
And I like that mechanism. You know, it's clear, right? And it's public information in many aspects because we do release the numbers of students. So between what the CDC and the health department releases on the transmission rate risk level, and then what we have in our buildings, which we live on a regular basis. If we have that basic structure of, if it's red, everyone is. If we go to orange, under 12 is still, but then we have these other things that we can look at to make sure that we're staying linked to the community itself. I thought it was a clear policy, but I also think there's big advantages for within our county and being consistent in many ways with the rules that we have with other districts that are around us, right? So it's not and it doesn't end up being a combative thing between the two, right? It's clear on both sides. Theirs is slightly different than ours because they don't have the transmission rate incorporated into as the main high-level trigger for the determination. But I think that's a valuable thing to keep in our policy.
I agree.
Jen, do you know if any of these students or staff are hospitalized, or were they all just sent home?
To the best of my knowledge, no one is currently hospitalized. I did try to take what Amy was sharing and added that into a document that I put in your board packet just to, as a proposal, just trying to put something down in writing, just to kind of summarize that.
I'm ready to make a motion if we are done discussing. I'm ready for a motion if everybody's done, but I don't want to step on toes if we want to add to the conversation.
Just to clarify before we move forward, so Jen, what you have, we're seeing in this is what you just kind of built based on this conversation?
Right, well, so the initial chart is the same chart that I shared with you all a couple of weeks ago, just looking at transition rates. So I didn't really change the left column or the middle column, but in the right column I added the part about building population being above 1%, and that, that they would mask until it drops to below the 0.5%.
Are we never going to unmask these 12 and unders?
Nope, that's in there.
So it goes down lower when it hits the yellow for the 12 and under. And then as soon as we're
No,
blue,
we don't get down to unmasking those little kids until low transmission.
No, it's in moderate transmission, except when seated in the classroom. So they would,
All students up to age 12 will wear masks inside.
except when seated in the classroom.
Just to clarify, so it says all students up to age 12 will wear masks inside, except when they are seated in their classroom.
And that's for the moderate transmission, that yellow statement.
Okay, but why do they have to wear them when they're outside of the classroom? I don't understand that.
There's a lot of congestion in hallways where they are, I don't know how you would ever expect that they would stay 6 feet apart or even 3 feet apart. They are walking arm in arm half the time. So I think that would be the highest, that's where they're going to be infected. That's where the transmission is going to be. And I completely support them being, I love the fact that they have something where they won't have to wear them in classrooms, because especially if you're talking about, Tim, you brought up pedagogy earlier, especially when you're talking about them learning to read and write, that would be an issue that would really, I think, help teachers.
I'm sorry, but everything I'm reading and everything I've read for the last 3 weeks showing that this age group has little to no transmission.
Yes, I'm going to disagree with that.
Very low sickness. I mean, there is some. Again, if you look at the places where it's happening, there's a whole lot more than just their age. And if you have a child who is high risk for a number of factors, you have the option of putting a mask on them. But so many of these kids, I'm sorry, but I'm hearing that we've got a lot of kids who are in they're not at 8th grade levels. And we have a lot of issues as far as educating these kids right now for the year that they missed last year. Putting a mask on these young kids is you know, you're just doing them a second year. How much education are we going to get for the fact that they're still low transmission? For the majority of them, you're going to have very low sickness, very low transmission from them, and yet we're going to mask them, and we're going to take another year out of their education.
Well, their education's going to be more adversely affected if they're not in the building, if they're not face to face. And if we get much higher,
The
we're going to have
majority
to
of
close
these kids
schools.
don't even know they have it unless they're tested.
And
And how many of these kids have already had it and didn't know it? And hence, they're not going to get it again.
I'm not sure we know that for sure.
We pretty much know that natural immunity lasts longer and is more durable. It covers more of the COVIDs, and it's already lasting longer.
I think there's a lot of gray in that area, especially with this young population. And I think that's one of the risks, right? We don't necessarily know. We don't necessarily know if they are immune to it and they lose that immunity for some physiological reason. So my concern is I don't think there's a direct correlation of putting a mask and learning. I think there's a direct correlation between being in a classroom and learning and being home and learning. And then so I think there is a lot of value to do these mitigations that we are doing, and I think raising this one mitigation, I think adds a protection that I think definitely has, in what I have read of evidence, and I've tried to keep up with a lot of the things that you were seeing, Sheila, I still think it's the best mechanism for us at this time and for our students, because it will almost heavily lean toward keeping the infection rate within our students lower. Again, and one of the issues that we have that keeps it even more confusing is it's the physiological group and the inability to do some of the actual scientific testing of control and non-control with transmittance of the disease. And then you get Delta, and now you have Mu, and then you get, right? So there's all of these things that are coming at us that is, I think, hard to us to necessarily manage specifically to, but I think in broadly speaking, and in probably the best evidence that we have at this point, that masking is probably one of the better mitigation mechanisms that there is. And I think we're going to learn more. I think because we learned that we didn't know a lot about this in these ages and how to control some of these transferences. I think there's great value in that. I think this policy is an easy way to communicate to our staff. It's an easy way to communicate to our community. I think it's a very good place for us to modify our current policy, to go in that direction.
Are we ready to vote?
You say that again?
Oh, I'm sorry, are we ready to vote?
I don't believe there was a motion that was made yet.
Okay, so I can make a motion. So I move that we adopt the proposed mask protocol as we're seeing it, which puts so that we adopt a universal mask mandate for our district while our community transmission is in the level high, and that we reevaluate once our community transmission rates lower.
I second.
Is there anything, so with that, is there anything else that would tighten up the parameters, or are there any questions left to go along with this? I guess, do we need to also say that we will, I guess I'm curious, as the numbers move through the colors, can we put a timeline on how we will identify that? Is that the day of? Is that within at the next board meeting? Is that within a 2-week time period to see if they go up and down? Just if we can kind of add that to it real quick, what we are looking at as we move through the colors.
I think this weekly idea, since
Okay.
the health department information that we've been getting is on a weekly basis on Thursdays, so that opens up that Friday opportunity to communicate out and make the determination a lot of the data seems to be aligning to this. It comes out and it's available on this Thursday window to make a Friday decision. And I don't think that we need to have a board meeting every week to
No.
be able to do that. I think passing that on to the administration is the most important thing to do. But I also like to make a caveat that, if there are significant outstanding issues, that the superintendent needs the authority to move quickly. And so if something comes up that is totally unexpected, and with consultation with the health department, they may have to move very quickly for certain situations. And I think that we need to make sure that that's in here and open, that the superintendent, along with the consultation with the health department, have the ability to move in emergency situations, which we could have, and we just don't know, but to give that authority now and as we move forward.
That's wise.
So, taking into account everything that was said within the motion, adding in the weekly review with a decision made on Friday, or shared out with families and staff on Fridays for the following week. Also then adding in case an emergency situation is needed, that is given, that's not something that the board would decide on, that is something that the administration within the school district would decide on as they see fit within the buildings.
I'm okay with that.
I believe we can make a motion, because we had a first and a second, so I believe we can make a motion on, or a vote on Lee's initial motion.
I can move to modify that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I move to modify the motion with what Amy just said regarding the weekly reporting and the emergency authorities. So there's the motion, so then I would need a second.
I second.
All right, so are there any more questions? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, and that passes then 4 to 1. All right, so with that being said, and that we are in red, timeline-wise, that will be needed to be shared out to families and within the schools. So families should be looking for an email from you outlining what they can expect in the timeline that goes along with that. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Make another comment. Another comment that Jen, I'd like to look to you and Linda toward is some of our conversation regarding pedagogy. There's concerns with the younger students, teachers of the younger students, and they're feeling that the masks are significantly hindering, especially their literacy and reading components. Is there some kind of professional development or some kind of techniques, tools that we can do to support them in that concern, which is a valid concern, and I definitely get it. Whether we get them the clear masks that are available, or again, that these are expertise things that you guys would know more about than I necessarily would know about. But I think we should extend some offerings, especially to those students, even special needs students where that's a concern, to help support them in that direction to go.
All right. So with that, we move into the citizens' request to address the board on any agenda or non-agenda item, and that starts off with Brianna Mogenberg.
Hello, Brian Mogenberg from Mount Pleasant. Thank you all and bless your hearts. Tim, in regards to helping children breathe better and having a break from masks, we can start by not allowing them to wear a mask and giving them a choice and letting the parents make that choice for their own health concern of their own child. You had referenced that the health department is not making this a mandate. And I asked yourself, why is the health department not making this a mandate? And you had said, because it becomes criminal versus behavioral. And you do understand it becomes criminal because it then therefore goes through the law and the police have to be involved. And because it's through the school, there is no law in order for you to do this. It is no law in order for you to do this. I do want to bring up a really small point here, and I say small because I'm talking about statistical significance. I'm sure you're all well aware of what that means. So speaking of children, children are 99.99% statistically able to defeat this virus on their own, whether they are vaccinated or whether they wear a mask or what other mitigation measures you use. Statistically, you are not increasing their percentage to defeat the virus. You're just simply trying to prevent them from getting it. And you know what? They're gonna likely almost 100% defeat the virus. So I wanna give you a couple of dates here. On August 4th, you as a district, as well as the local health department, were sent the same FOIA and asked to produce evidence that masks do not cause harm. Neither of you were able to produce that evidence. And the Mount Pleasant Public School Board response was, I quote, "Based on our research, your request identifies records and materials that are not in the possession of or under the control of the Mount Pleasant Public Schools," unquote. You have been provided with much evidence on how masks harm children, especially those younger children. I work with kids all day. Have you ever played hide and seek with kids before? And you cover your head up with a blanket, let's just say a sheet. You know what? After about a minute, you're having a really hard time breathing. Do that for 8 hours a day, when statistically speaking, you don't need to protect yourself from that. If somebody needs to protect themselves, there are measures that they can take to do that. Now, on September 4th, you were also provided evidence. The CDC, that you like to quote so well, stated, "To our knowledge," and this is quote, "to our knowledge, only one randomized controlled trial has been conducted to examine the efficiency of cloth masks," unquote. And do you know what that said? You can go back to what you were referenced. Here, let's quote this again. "Those results do not favor cloth masks," unquote. Do you want me to say that again? The results do not favor cloth masks. You can look at our numbers right now, and our numbers currently are no longer the purple scheme that you see that was the Michigan Safe Start map. You are now seeing what the CDC has. And our numbers right now are at 150 cases daily. Do you know that back when we peaked, we were at over 650 cases? And you know what we were doing then? We were masking. A mask does not stop the spread of this virus. And last winter, when we were at our peak, do you know where our kids were? Oh my goodness. They were offline because the governor shut us down. The masks are not going to work. None of this headache every week is going to work. The back and forth isn't going to work. And you're not just creating a headache for our children, you're creating a headache for yourselves. Stop. Just stop the nonsense. Go back to allowing parent choice, because that's what people want. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mark Perry.
Hello. My name is Mark Perry. I've lived in this community for a number of years and paid a boatload of taxes to support our community and our school district. I came here after watching the August 16th board meeting on video. It's my first time that I've been here in person. I took particular note of one of the public comments talking about a survey that had been sent out to community members and parents. And when the survey was returned, this gal seemed to have the opinion that the information from the community was not being acknowledged. My question is that true? And then also, she made a comment about not, the board failing to talk to other communities that have decided to go maskless and what their experience has been. So my question there, is that also true? It seems that many of the board members are taking refuge in the fact that other board members feel very comfortable with the mask mandate, and I'm not sure that we're pursuing the truth here. Many of you have deferred to so-called experts, but one problem is that even Dr. Redfield, who's recently retired from the CDC as the head, recently acknowledged, who is shocked, that the scientific and medical experts in many cases have been lying about the science. This goes back to last summer. At best, masks are a coin flip, but more and more doctors and scientists suggest masks don't work, and many point to the quality of the mask, the duration they're worn, the fact they don't cover the eyes. These doctors suggest masks are simply a comfort blanket. The truth is not found in consensus opinion. Let me repeat that. The truth is not found in consensus opinion. We're finding out that we can no longer rely solely on these so-called experts. Question, why has there been absolutely no discussion about therapeutics? Ivermectin, quercetin, hydroxychloroquine. They work, they're safe. Many of them are found over the counter in other countries. Why not here? Many of them can be used prophylactically, especially ivermectin. Children are not dying from COVID. They aren't. And they're not transmitting it for the most part. But they are causing bacterial infections. Now, what I'm talking about here are the masks. They're causing bacterial infections, psychological and learning problems for children, reduced oxygen levels for those kids, etc. Can we please have the truth? Can we please have an honest review of the facts? Thank you.
Next is Kelly Fountain.
Hello, I'm Kelly Fountain. I was just wondering with the RSV, the flu, and many other variants, and we don't mask for any of those, so I'm not sure why we're masking for this COVID or the variants. There's going to be 8 billion variants coming down the line, so we don't really need to mask everything and make sure that the parents get their choice on what they want to do with their kids. I was wondering how long and how many years do you want to mask these kids? I was just wondering. And parents can't deal with another color coding mask protocol, and that's not one. I mean, I get it, but once you start adding another thing for a parent to do, they're not going to do that. They're busy. They got things to do. They don't need to come to school and find out, oh, we're in blue today. Okay, gosh, well, I didn't bring a mask, or I didn't bring this, or I didn't. They forget their agendas for their kids. They barely make it. They don't need another thing to do for their kids. You know, and it just makes it very frustrated for them. Let's see. And I was noticing that the health department is not mandating this at this time. I'm not sure why you guys want to continue the mask mandate. If they're not going to back you up with it, then you're just doing it for yourself, I think, at this point, for I'm not sure what reason. Either liability, I'm not really sure. But and then I was wondering, with all the schools around Mount Pleasant, they don't really have any mask mandates. They let the parents choose what they would like to do. But Mount Pleasant's the only one right here that is doing that. So I'm not really sure why the push for that. I think everybody should have a choice. And we need to make sure that we're focusing on educating our kids and making sure all the stuff that they lost last year or two, they can catch up on. I'm pretty sure a lot of the kids are way behind and need more help with that. And I was noticing one of the board members, all they were doing on the whole thing tonight was, when can I vote? When can I vote? When can I vote? Well, you have to listen to everybody's ideas and stuff before you can just push the vote. So I didn't enjoy that. And it's just, I'm very frustrated with this, even though I don't have a child right now. I've been through the system with a few of you, and it just frustrates me, and I'm very disappointed with the way it's going. So, thanks.
Thank you. Next is Laura Gourlay.
Good evening. My name is Laura Gourlay. I live in Mount Pleasant, and I work in Mount Pleasant Public Schools. I actually work in Pullen Elementary with DK through second grade kids, so 4 to 7-year-old people. And we've been masked all along since school started, and I'm so grateful for that. And I thank you for your conversation tonight and your decision to have us all mask up, because I guess I fall into the category of people that believes that the science that we do have is the science that I'm going to go with, because it seems to me it's a good investment to do that. And as far as the little kids wearing masks, my sense is that they handle that very well. They don't really have a problem with it. We had a situation today, maybe you know, it was very windy, and there was a tornado, and there was talk of maybe we're going to have a tornado drill. And we did. We had a tornado drill. And the children, actually, I'm in room 122 at Pullen. It's a kind of enclosed room. And a significant number of kids had to come into my room. And so they did. They had masks on, and I had a mask on. I was glad we did. And a couple of the little kids, they heard the lightning. They heard that in the storm, and we got very quiet. We listened to the storm. It was scary for them, some. And they cuddled up to some of the adults in the room, and they said, I'm scared. We said, oh, are you scared? How does it feel in your body? Let's take some breaths and be together. Is there a way that we might feel safe here? And so things happen in school sometimes that are scary, like a tornado drill. Sometimes it's a fire drill. Sometimes it's a lockdown. Somebody might be outside with a weapon. We've got a lockdown. Little kids, they get scared of these things. And the way that the adults handle them tells the tale. So the way that the adults handle these things, all of us in the room, even if we have differing opinions, tell the tale. And as a mental health therapist, I want mental health for all. We can get that if the adults can set the tone in a good way. But when the adults don't set the tone in a good way, it's hard on the children. But as far as them masking in schools with the littles, they can do it. And if we all mask and we keep our community safe, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much, because I work in the schools and I want to be safe. And I recently had someone I know die of COVID, so it's a little touching to me. First time. I've been in the pandemic as long as y'all have been. Now I have someone on my list, someone who died of COVID, so it feels not good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Cindy Poole.
Hello, my name is Cindy Poole. I'm a chiropractor. And I want to ask you, out of those 14 children that have COVID, how many of them have been hospitalized? What has happened to our death rate in Isabella County? Have we had a marked increase in that? I don't believe that's going on. Why are you masking the healthiest portion of our population, hoping that it will do what you wish it will do? Because in a paper mask, the pores are 1,000 times larger than a virus. 68% of the parents surveyed in Mount Pleasant said they don't want their children wearing a mask. And I have to ask you, if the mask were so effective, why do we have COVID over the world? Why does the side of a box of masks say this does not protect you against COVID? And if the mask were so efficient, why do doctors who are in intensive care, taking care of COVID patients, wear a full body hazard suit, an enclosed facial shield, and an oxygen tank? Because that would be a lot better in preventing the COVID virus getting to that caretaker. Paper masks are not that efficient. But we are a human race who have survived for millions of years. Why? We have germs all over our skin. We even have streptococcus in our back of our throats, each and one of us. But it depends on a person's immune system on whether or not that germ gets to take over. People are forgetting that we have an immune system. And when we do get COVID, and most children, very few children, I believe last I heard was 400 children have died of COVID in the United States. They had comorbidities. We come upon this earth and we are going to leave and die in this earth. But the least affected are the children because they have a good immune system. If we didn't have a good immune system, we wouldn't have this population problem. We are survivors because of the way our body is designed. And it does fight, and it does do quite a good job. We can't depend on Pfizer to come up with this gene therapy to save us. When they look at the most vaccinated countries, like Israel, 65% of the people who are coming down with COVID again have been fully vaccinated. So when your little sign out there says, wear a mask if you're unvaccinated, is not the truth. And there has been a lot of media and drug companies that are not telling us the truth. Obviously, 68% of the people didn't want their children masked because they can see through this dance. When are you going to become as brave as these parents? Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jessica Lapp.
Hello, I'm a parent of a high school student and a community member. Just want to read you something from the American Academy of Pediatrics that was published recently. As of September 2, over 5 million children have tested positive for COVID-19 since the onset of the pandemic. About 252,000 cases were added the past week, the largest number of child cases in a week since the pandemic began. After declining in early summer, child cases have increased exponentially with over 750,000 cases added between August 5th and September 2nd. So I thank you tonight for looking out for our kids. I realize this is a very heated issue. I realize there's been a lot of attempts at intimidation and misinformation, and I really appreciate, as a parent and a community member, that you are putting the children's health first rather than your own interests or interests of other louder voices that we hear. I do not want my child to be a victim of Russian roulette with people who think that viruses aren't real or that vaccines have chips in them that can track us when we all have our own little trackers carrying around anyway. So I appreciate you having these honest discussions about where you all are on these various issues, what information you're drawing from, and that you're doing it publicly so that the community can participate in it. So thank you for your time, And thank you for a mask mandate for all ages at the high school and the lower levels as well.
Thank you. Next is John Chiodini. John Chiodini? Next is Eric Chaircover.
Yeah, thank you. Eric Chirkover. I have a 11th grader and a 9th grader here. I actually just want to echo what my friend Jessica just said. It's music to my ears that you voted for a mask mandate, and I think it's also great that you're going to review it. I think we'd all like to be able to not wear the mask if we don't have to. But the way I see it, if we have the mask mandate, those numbers will come down because we know masks work. So sooner rather than later, wearing a mask might result in you not having to wear a mask, if that makes any sense at all. I'm not a scientist. That's it. I just want to say thanks. Thanks. That was the right decision, and I support it, and I speak for a number of people who support it, including my wife. And thank you for everything you've done, and you have my unconditional support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Maureen Ike.
Good evening again, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak again. I am Maureen N. Ake. I'm a professor at Central Michigan University, a resident of Mount Pleasant. I've been listening to this anti-mask rhetoric, and as somebody who did not grow up in this country and who comes from a place where people are really pleading for medical services and for something, such as wearing a mask, it sounds like population control to me. Who do you want to kill? The children? Wait till they're all dying like flies before then we act? So I applaud the board for making this decision today. I don't have a kid in this school, but what affects this school also affects me because I live in this community, because I have friends whose kids go to this particular school, because as a matter of fact, I do have relatives who go to this school. So thank you. As such, I would like to say thank you again to the board for its work and its patience and its diligence in attempting to address a wide range of difficult topics. It's not been easy. You are doing an amazing job. So my people say, a bird once asked the lizard why it's always shaking its head. And the lizard said, I fall down from the tree, nobody claps for me. What do you think? I get to clap for myself. So you need to clap for yourselves. You're doing an amazing job. So thank you. I also want to register my strong support for board members Bond, Pangel, and Stegman, whose recall I sternly believe is absolutely unnecessary. It doesn't make sense trying to silence people for saying, let's be cautious, let's save ourselves. Critical race theory, I thought we had stopped talking about that. But here we are again. It came up earlier in a talk about September 16th. I want to remind everyone that Michigan public schools are not teaching critical race theory, as Dr. Michael Rice, the state superintendent of education has asserted. So, I hope board member Sheila Murphy will stop introducing or talking about CRT, which you are not teaching, as a Trojan horse to avoid conversations about racism, diversity, and inclusion. We need to have these conversations. You talked about masking policy. Although you've made this decision, I hate to say, we don't have the time to wait till the sky falls and then we say, oh, let's do something. Absolutely not. We do not have the time. So please, let's stop playing ostrich and let's stop playing with people's lives, the lives of the children, our own lives, the lives of the staff members, the teachers who teach here. The American Pediatrics Association, and I'm glad Jessica has read this. Jessica Lapp read part of what they have said. But I want to reiterate what they said. According to them, they recommend that, quote, everyone older than age 2 should wear masks, regardless of vaccination status. I agree with that. So thank you again, and good evening, and please continue to do what you're doing. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Next is Corey Beard.
Hi. I am just a parent of a 4th grader. My daughter, who is 10, she has severe anxiety, so I did come here to hear about the masking and the mandates and the recommendations. I did have a speech, but after observing and hearing you out, I am mostly concerned that we aren't talking about mental health, the mental health of our children. As you pull your mask down each time to speak, Ms. Pangle in particular, you're expecting my child, our children, to comply and be rewarded with dojo points when they comply with your recommendations, while this whole time, this last 2 weeks that you're gonna go off of, you're making this decision based on the last 2 weeks and calling it a spike, when I think we're forgetting that children get they have allergies, they get the flu, they get a cold. We had health issues before that, right? Which I'm gonna again say brings me back to the mental health and mindfulness and breathing techniques that helps my child who has anxiety. That's what helps her and gets her through. That's what helps her learn. That's what helps her stay focused. You know what her focus has been on lately? Not disappointing her teacher, who rewards her with dojo points, or I should say, does not reward her when she does not comply with your recommendations, as her teacher is not masking. So if we want to talk about the masking guidelines, in the last 2 weeks, I feel like you have put my child at risk if we're going to go off the CDC guidelines. The teachers and faculty and the staff should have been masked. At the same time, you're teaching these children that they're safe because they're masked or because they cannot get vaccinated, and the teachers are safe because they are or not. Who knows? They have the choice, right? So then, if you're going to mask, we're going to have to do it correctly. Masks have to work efficiently, right? We have to use the right ones. They need to be given new masks every time they sneeze, every time they cough. There is no face touching, and I am again going off the CDC recommendations of properly wearing a mask, as you have not been on the school board. So they need to be stored properly. Every time they eat, they need a new one. Every time they touch their mask, they need a new one. The fabric masks, we all know there's so many contradictions. I'm sorry, but the CDC, this whole conversation is very contradicting. That's why I'm gonna just point blank make it a statement that maybe the mental health should be our next conversation, because this is destroying my child. Because do you know what they let my child do when she needs to take a mask break? They let her step out into the hallway or go to the office, because I have taught her to breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out.
4 minutes. Please wrap up your comments.
So I would just like to make that a point that this should be our next conversation, is really what this is doing to, this is affecting my child. I'm sure a lot of people in here can relate that anxiety is a real thing. It is, and it will destroy you if you let it. And I just don't think you're considering it, and I don't hear it, and it's not being pushed enough. This is children we're talking about.
Please wrap up your
So
comments.
regardless of your data, I'm not a doctor, I'm a parent, and I'm observing, and I'm seeing these kids getting
wrap up
heat
your comments.
exhaustion.
You've had your 4 minutes.
Okay, heat exhaustion though. So we need to just start focusing on our child's well-being, mental health too, because that matters. And at the next one, I guess I will have to say what I need to say. I'm just disappointed in
Please
seeing
wrap up
you
your
take your
comments.
mask down while you speak. Is it hard to
Please
speak
wrap
with a
up your
mask
comments.
on?
You've had well over
It
4
is,
minutes.
isn't it? I'm just very disappointed. Shame on you for that whole conversation with your
Please wrap
mask
up your
down.
comments. You've had your
As you
4
mandated
minutes.
them. Just saying. And shame on you for
Please
putting my
give other
child
people
at
in the
risk
community an opportunity to speak. You've had
for the
well over your
last
4
2
minutes.
weeks while her teacher did not mask. We'll talk about
Thank you. Next is, that is the end of the citizens' request to address the board. Next is the Board of Education's discussion. Is there anything, this is the opportunity for any board member to discuss issues or concerns that they may have. Is there anything that anyone would like to talk about? Not seeing anything, I call this meeting adjourned.